Love Your Kitchen, Design in the Heart of the Home, proudly sponsored by Blum, the podcast where we explore the art of crafting your dream kitchen. I'm your host, Faye Newman, a freelance kitchen designer with a passion for creating spaces that truly reflect the heart of the home. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Love Your Kitchen podcast. As ever, thank you very much for joining me. So today's conversation is going to be all about handleless kitchen design. So I've got a few examples to show you. I'm currently filming at an independent kitchen and bedroom showroom in Harlow, Worcestershire, called Elgar Kitchens. They've lent me the space today to be able to show you tangible examples of different handleless displays with different finishing elements and touches to each of the sort of, what we're looking at, different textures, different door types, just so by the end of this episode you get a real overview of how you can potentially, look at different design elements and see which ones work for you and your space. Also as well, I'll be talking about sort of mixing and matching the handleless elements with, say, maybe handles or maybe a push to open element or overhanging the door slightly. And this will help overcome, in some cases, sort of design obstacles that you can have. Or it might be a case of you just like the look of the handles and all the handleless function on all of the base cabinetry. So I'll show you how to sort of mix and match those so that by the end of the episode, you know sort of everything there is to do with handleless kitchen design. So whether you're designing your kitchen yourself or you're working with a designer, it might just inspire, a final touch to add on to your finished design, or it might be a case of if you are just, in the initial stages of searching for your kitchen, it might just give you a little bit of inspiration of sort of the core things to think about to create a beautiful seamless finish with this style of kitchen. So before I start talking about sort of design features, I think it's best for me just to run through the different types of handleless kitchens available. So I would say the first sort of handleless kitchen that came about was what's called the J-pull handle. So the J-pull handle is a door that has a J profile actually routed out into the top of the door itself. So this door opens and closes as a normal sort of slab or shaker door will, with, sort of lay-on hinges. So there's no extras that need to be added onto this door to create a handleless finish. This is really popular in sort of matte painted like this. Gloss used to be really popular, but I'm finding matte is the preferred option now. But it's just very simple to include. And say if you've moved into a house with a shaker kitchen and you like a handleless look, this would be your sort of easiest one to go for if you didn't want to change any of your cabinets and you just wanted to change your door. So I'd say that is sort of the first entry into the handleless sort of era within sort of the UK. So the next popular choice is what's known as the rail system, and lots of different companies have their own name for this. So it might be true handleless, it might be a Gola rail, you might be going to sort of a German kitchen company and they have their own sort of range, etc. for this. It's all a similar concept where you have the rail itself is actually routed into the top of the cabinet. You then have an oversized sort of height door in front of that, and the gap at the back from the door height to the bottom of the rail, that's where you can, pop your hands behind and then open and close that element from there. This is really popular purely because you can create a really beautiful sort of seamless look, but also you can have different rail colours. So there's lots of different elements and design details that can be added to this particular range, which I think is why, it's so popular. And it means that it can go with, a lot more material choices, colour schemes, that sort of thing. There's also the availability of doing a bit of mixing and matching between maybe that and handles or push to open elements, which I can go through as well. So that, again, I would say is probably the most popular handleless choice. You've also got the option of going for an integrated or built-in handle into a slab door. So this means that, you actually, it has maybe you have like a letterbox sort of rectangular section at the top. You might have little circles. It's a way of adding another design detail into that particular door. Some start from the top, some are sort of fully integrated into sort of slightly down from the top, so you can see sort of all of the edges are painted round. They also offer options to have like back plates on those. So say if you've got a taupe kitchen with walnut features, for instance, if you wanted to go for like the circle, if you like that sort of look, you can have the bit that's exposed for the circle, so the backing of that, you can have it in a similar walnut to the rest of the sort of the room. So again, it just pulls that scheme together. So that's another popular choice. You've then also got the option of going for push to open doors everywhere, which means that there isn't a rail, there's not a groove at the top like a J-pull handle, there's no sort of integrated handle, you're just relying on pushing and closing sort of every door, that's in that space. There's obviously pros and cons to that, but equally, it does look beautiful. And if you are really looking for that sort of minimal, seamless look, that looks completely untouched, that's where that really comes into its own. A more cost-effective way of creating a sort of a handleless look, but still having a handle, but having it sort of on a slab door, you can have what's called a trim handle, which sits at the back of the door and then overhangs slightly on the top. And it just allows you then to open and close that door using that sort of trim handle, above. But again, it's still not adding or drilling a handle into the front of the door. So it still does give you that quite a seamless element. But again, from a furniture height perspective, everything stays the same because it's just a normal slab door, but just with a different handle. Also, I say to clients as well, sort of a good sort of, if you're, or I'll say money saving tip, it's not money saving, but a design tip is if you're sort of unsure about sort of handle choices and things, because these are drilled in at the back, these trim handles, and they sort of sit over the door and down, it allows you to potentially change your handles in the future and, pop some handles on the front if needed. So again, it just gives you that little bit of play in the future if you want to, but again, it is also a really popular choice as well. So those are all of the sort of handless type doors out there. You can of course get anything sort of made bespoke as well, so there might be sort of slight differences to those styles from a particular sort of supplier that you're looking to go to. However, from a mainstream perspective, that's those are normally the way to incorporate sort of a handless sort of model within your design. So because I could probably do an episode on every one of those styles, today's focus is going to be on the rail system element, purely just because I'd say it's the most technical. You've of course got to think about your cabinetry as well as the extra rails, which is another decision from a colour perspective, a position perspective, and it might impact the design, especially on your sort of your verticals, which I can go through. So that's why I just wanted to focus on that today. So at least then you sort of know all the variables involved and accessories that you can get with this particular style of door. A couple of logistics to think about when you're looking to incorporate the rail system within your design is if you are going wall to wall in your space with a mix of maybe larder cabinets, maybe it's a full bank of larder cabinets, or it's larders and base cabinets, maybe you've got a cooking area in the middle or a sink section, but you're sort of, you haven't quite got enough space, or you're sort of, it's quite tight trying to fit everything in. What you need to do with the rail system is incorporate vertical strips going down, either side of all of your larders, or maybe just one side if you didn't need to have, if it's all hinged and things, you don't need it on the left-hand side. This is of course to open your doors and drawers, so it's needed if you're looking to just go rails everywhere. But one thing you've got to think about is this is 35mm wide, the rail. So of course you've got to think about if you've got 35 sort of the left, 35 in the middle, and then 35 sort of, on the right-hand side. So that's taking over just over 100mm just on those rails going down, which is absolutely fine if you've got the room, but equally, if you're doing that on both sides, say, as I mentioned, you've got sort of your side-by-side ovens on one side, and then you've got your full height fridge freezer on the other side. You've got, I think that's 200 ml on that one, run that you've got with cabinetry, which you might have, which is great. But if you don't, that's an easy way of, changing or at least taking out sort of 100 ml of that, and then allowing for sort of a 50 ml filler either side, just to sort of think about different ways of opening those doors without the need of those vertical rails. So if that's you and you're sort of thinking, I have been looking at those rails, or we're trying to fit in two 600 ml larders side by side, but we just can't fit sort of the one closest to the wall in, it has to be a 500. This is a way that you could potentially look to, allow more room to get that 600 ml if you wanted to. So options that you can go for is you could go push to open on the doors that are on the larder section if you wanted to. That works well from a logistics perspective. It gives you sort of the look that you want aesthetically. So you've got no sort of handles breaking up, the run at all. You could look to incorporate sort of horizontal handles. That always looks really nice as well, and have like a mix of the horizontal with the rail system. Or you can look to go for sort of the integrated handle option, which I've spoken about before. And it might be a case of as well, it completely depends on your colour scheme and what sort of style that you're wanting to go for. Like we're in quite a sort of monochromatic, sort of dark. We've got the beautiful texture of the Otto door here, which is a veneered door. So you're getting the lovely sort of wood grain coming through, but it's painted, in sort of, a black or carbon colour, I believe they call it. So therefore, from, because you've got so many different sort of opposites everywhere else with the light worktop, the gold rail, that sort of thing, you don't need to sort of go for a two-tone on the doors. But some kitchens, you might think, actually, I'm going for quite a neutral scheme. I want to go for maybe, a lighter wood or some wooden elements, for the tower cabinets, and then have maybe the darker doors or more of a neutral for the base. And that would be also a good way of differentiating between the larders and the base cabinets, but also from the handles perspective. So again, going for push to open, you could have all of your wooden doors as push to open, and then have all of your base cabinets with like the horizontal rail going around, whether it's around the island or just stopping on a waterfall end like this. You can sort of mix and match and play about with that, a little bit more, and you've got a definite sort of differentiation between sort of the wood being pushed to open and then maybe sort of the painted option, which we've got here as well, using the rail system. So that's just something to think about from a logistics perspective. If you are struggling for space, there are different options that you can go for that allows you to minus off that 35 ml needed sort of in between and either side of your larder cabinets. Something else to think about as well is the horizontal rail sits at the top of all of your base cabinets, of course, because then that makes it easy for you to open. If you're going for drawers, you've got to remember, of course, there's no handle to sort of like bend down and open. So the way that they format the drawers with this particular range is slightly different. So you can have your two big pan drawers like you normally do, with any style of kitchen. Granted, these are smaller heights because, of course, you've got to think about the rail at the top. And then also they have what's called a mid-rail in between it, which again is fixed to the cabinet and routed in to allow you to open the bottom drawer. Something to think about is if you want to go for the 3-drawer format, you can still do that, but the top drawer opens at the top, and then the second drawer you need to reach down and open from the middle in order to access that. It just is personal preference. There is ways to have cutlery drawers and cutlery sort of trays inside one big pan drawer, so you can have an internal drawer that comes out at the same time, and then you can clip it and then push it back if you need to. So there are ways to get around the, having lots of lines in the drawers if that's just something that you're not, sort of into. But it's just good for you to be made aware of as well from an accessibility perspective of how you go to access those doors. So that's, a something to think about from a rail point of view. Also as well, naturally, if you're incorporating a rail anywhere, whether it's on, well actually it's just on your base cabinets, or if you're incorporating it into sort of a wall cabinet, but mainly on your base, you've got to think about the height of the cabinet is still the same, usually, depends on which company you're going for, but as standard, the height of the cabinet is the same. So you do go for smaller door sizes in order to allow for that rail, there. And some clients say, am I losing storage because you're going for a handleless rail system? The answer is no. I wouldn't say, like, technically you are, because obviously you've got to think about the fixed rails and things, but I don't think you're missing out on too much storage, unless you're thinking about the vertical rails, which is what I've already addressed. Then, you might be going for a smaller cabinet, like larger cabinet, for instance, than you would have preferred to go for, because you've got to think about all those extras sort of going on to that sort of kitchen run that you've got. If it's a case of you've looked at a certain supplier and you're like, Faye, they don't do, any sort of bespoke doors that are, or standard doors that are smaller in height in order to accommodate for the rail, but you still love the look of the rail system, what you can do is see if you can get your cabinets made 35mm taller, or a little bit taller, dependent on how big the rail is and sort of what the door heights and things are. But usually it'd probably be like 35mm sort of, taller, to see then if they can router it, in the top, or you can fix it on site, router it into the top, and then your door is still a standard size, but it will just, fix onto that as normal. So therefore you're not having to go for bespoke costs everywhere. But I would say that's probably quite a, there's a small chance of that happening now, because so many different suppliers, whether you're looking at sort of high street, independent, German, fully bespoke, like all of those, there's normally this sort of handleless option available across the board, from all of those companies. So, but yeah, just in case it's not, that is an option for you as well. Now looking into the key sort of design features and points to think about when you're looking at designing a handleless kitchen. So the first is, of course, having everything looking beautiful, in line, seamless, symmetrical as well. I think when you're going for a really minimal scheme, it's really obvious when something's not symmetrical or something's slightly out of alignment. So it's really important to, I'd say, get that symmetry and sort of simplify everything that you're doing, and maybe not go for lots of cabinets absolutely everywhere, and just have maybe drawers or like the same width cabinet going on, maybe your base cabinets, or maybe integrating some walls, maybe some shelving sections like we've got here, which work beautifully, having sort of the lift up cabinets underneath, and then you've got the beautiful sort of open cabinets above that. Again, that works well, but still there's no interference with a rail at the bottom of here, any handles, and you've got the design feature and the sort of advantage of having your sort of wall colour behind that as well. If you're going for quite a neutral theme, or like a dark moody theme like this, you could have a pop of colour at the back there, or continue the moody theme with like textured wallpaper or something at the back there, which will really just elevate and just make your design sort of more your own. So things like this, like when you start to sort of really look into the finer details of the design like that, and how you can add different textures or add different sections like that, it really does, elevate your design to the next level. Another key sort of feature and point to look into, which I've briefly touched on, is if you're mixing and matching different elements. So if you've got rail, say, on all your base cabinets, you could go for a horizontal sort of handle if you wanted to, on say like your wall cabinetry or your larder cabinets, to negate the need of the verticals going down. It can be a really interesting sort of collaboration, especially if you want to incorporate a different detail or metal finish and you want it, say, on the wall cabinets as well. So say if you've got a rail system, like the one that I'm sort of studying now is brass. So you've got that beautiful sort of brass finish. You could look to incorporate a brass horizontal sort of bar handle on these doors as well, if you felt like you wanted that pop of, the brass element on this section. Personally, on this design, I don't think you need it because you've got the detail of the open cabinetry above. However, when I've worked with clients in the past, they've had sort of a run of sort of wall cabinetry, and then maybe from afar when they're sort of set back, you can't actually see any reference to, say if they had like a copper rail or something like that, you can't see any reference to that on the wall cabinetry. So to tie everything in, they've incorporated having a horizontal handle, going across all of the hinge doors, just so it's in a similar sort of, I'd say, metal or copper finish to the rail. But again, they're quite away from each other. So I don't think it needs to be exact, but equally, something that complements, it's from the same sort of hue or shade of copper, or something, that layers or is quite similar, that will work quite well. So that is definitely, an option. What they have incorporated on the design here is no rail underneath for the wall cabinet, but what they've done is literally just overhang that door slightly from the top boxes. So usually the doors are standard sizes, and then you just need to reduce the height of your top boxes behind slightly, enough for you to sort of, get your fingers behind and then be able to open and hinge open that door. I'd probably say they've gone about 40 to 50 mil as a gap behind this particular cabinet that I'm looking at. But again, that's just a very cost-effective way, because you're not having to fit another rail, you're not having to pay for 2 handles, and you're not having to potentially incorporate a handleless feature sort of on the face of the door. But 2, again, it just adds to the simplicity of the overall look. If it's a case of you want the cabinet to sit flush, which is fine as well, say if it's raised up quite high and you can see the underside of it, so you don't want to see the overhang, but equally you want it to be, just the door like this, what you can do is just add a push to open element into the thickness of the cabinet. It's really easy for either your cabinet company to fit, or to fit on site if needed. And you literally just plug it into the thickness of the cabinet sort of running round, or the structure of the cabinet. Something to note with that is only apply one to the door. So I'd apply this sort of in the middle. From experience, when you start applying a couple onto a door, it just gets a bit complicated with trying to shut it and everything. So always just fix, I would say, one, or go for maybe the sort of like, if you're going for a lift up system like this, look at the Aventus range with Blum, where it's a lift up system that stays up, and then it's soft closing, sort of, when you're shutting it down. Or you can have the ones where you push the button on the side and then electronically it comes down from there. So you don't have to think about sort of, obviously you need to push it open, but you don't have to think about sort of, pulling it down or pushing it back. It's just on a really neat mechanism there. So you've got nothing sort of plugging into any of your cabinetry with that particular one. So there's different options for that. Also, you can go for your integrated handle, which is what I've briefly mentioned before. So that's when it's actually inset into the face of the door itself. And then, as I mentioned, you've got your back plates and things like that at the back to help, incorporate maybe either the same finish to make it look, again, super minimalistic, or maybe incorporate a different finish, in the room. As I mentioned, like the walnut element, you might have like a wooden flooring, so therefore that, works beautifully. It might be a case of you're going for a painted door, and you want to piece that with maybe, another colour, or the metal from the actual rail system itself. So some of them, you could potentially have a sort of a letterbox insert into here, with the back plate being the gold, so therefore it's relevant because it matches that up really nicely. So things like that are ways to really add finer detail to your design, and again, this is where these elements allow you to personalize it to your taste. I think sometimes when you've sort of given all of these options, one, it's a lot more decisions for you, but two, you can get really excited and you're like, yes, I want, this here, let's incorporate that. But what I'd probably say is, if you're sticking to a true handleless design like this, Base cabinet wise, keep those all the same with the rail system. Personally, I would keep the rails the same everywhere as a consistency, and then mix and match the doors, and then add, the certain sort of, different handleless elements on, say, the wall cabinetry or the larder cabinetry if you need to. But that's normally how I would sort of, differ and show sort of the different handleless sort of features and from there. But again, it's personal preference, and I would just say, if you're designing the kitchen yourself, like look online, see how others have done it. Equally, if you are, working with a designer, put forward all of your ideas, and then hopefully they can sort of guide you onto the right track of the different combinations and things that is good to go for, with your particular scheme, because it's not just the kitchen that you've got to think about, like it's the whole, the whole space altogether. So if it's a case of it's a kitchen diner, what finishes are you incorporating into the dining room? What can you pull from there and maybe incorporate as a detail onto the fitted furniture? All of these elements, really do pull everything together. And dependent on sort of where you're getting your inspiration for your colour scheme, whether it's like a painting, whether it's a cushion, whether you just really love a combination that you've seen on Pinterest for the door colours, then you're sort of looking at all of those beautiful colours and seeing where else you can, implement and add those into the room. That's okay too. So it's just figuring out sort of, where you're getting your colour scheme from, and then layering and seeing where you can add the different colour preferences from there. Another element where you can add a little bit of colour onto your built-in furniture is sometimes, depending on what supplier that you go for, they have an option to go for the rail finish, so like the metal finish, whether it's usually white, black, or like a graphite, copper, brass. You can also get like wooden versions of it, which works beautifully as well. But there's different finishes that you can go for, but also they normally do a plinth option. So the plinth is what sits on the floor. People call it the skirting, whatever it is, or the kickboards is the normal sort of term for it. You can also have it in that colour as well. So if you're going for an island that looks completely sort of floating, it carries that around really nicely from there. But just something to note, that's another way that you can incorporate a different sort of finish and texture sort of within that space. Another key point that I wanted to show you, but on a different display, is how to keep the continuous seamless rail sort of throughout the design. So I would say this is probably one of the most important factors to think about when you're going for a handleless kitchen. It's really important to get sort of the flow and the aesthetics right of the overall sort of look. So you haven't got any sort of end panels or any breaks in the rail at the top. Make sure they're cut back and round so that you've just got one rail going all the way across like this. And something particular on this design that I really love is it's got what's called an L shape sort of, end panel on. So you can see that it doesn't go all the way to the floor. So a usual end panel just fixes onto the side of your cabinet, and then it goes all the way down from the top to the bottom to the floor. This is raised up so that it's painted finish at the top and also at the bottom. But it means that the plinth at the bottom is floating, going all the way around. So this is really popular on islands, I would say more so than runs like this, but equally look to incorporate it on these runs. So any sort of exposed ends, if you can, look to incorporate sort of an L shape leading into the wall. That's what you use for sort of an end of the room. And something to note is they normally oversize the depth of these panels, just so you can cut and scribe it to the wall, okay? And then it sits flush with the rest of the furniture. So that adds to the seamless quality at the bottom, but also it adds to the seamless quality at the top as well. So you've got a whole section coming from the back of the wall at a right angle. You need little corners to attach onto your rails here, going all the way across. So you've got no interruptions at all for any of those base cabinets, which again, just, it adds obviously more complexity to the designer's job, because they've got to, make sure they've put on the L shapes, make sure they've incorporated enough of the rail, the depth at the back as well as the front, and also for the, you know, the external sort of corners and things that you need to incorporate, and also the fitter's job. But equally, I think it actually makes it look so much more simple, and seamless is the key word that we're using. But you can't, when you first walk in and look at that space, like, you can't understand particularly why, but you can just see that it's just well designed and it works. And to me, that's good design, when you're not picking out, you know, oh, this needs to be here, you know, this is why this looks amazing. You've got this amazing sort of, you know, big, bold centerpiece. Like, to me, something like this, which is quite pared back, but just done well, you know, really works. Something else that I really like on this display is you can see sort of the drawer systems. So we've got 3 drawer systems, which look like either 900 or a metre. I think they're a metre actually, looking at them. But we've got the 3 drawer system either side, and then you've got the 2 drawer system in the middle. So as I mentioned before, you've got the top opening drawer above, you've got the mid opening drawer underneath, which you get from putting your hand sort of behind the bottom of the second drawer from the mid rail, and then you've got your big drawer sort of underneath that. But again, symmetrically, even though that we've gone for a mix of 3 and then 2, because we've situated the 2 in the middle, and the reason why it is 2 is because they've got a sort of a U-shape drawer system sort of around that, where you can basically incorporate a working drawer but around your sink that you want to go for. Obviously, it depends on the size, width of the drawer and also the sink, but that is, you know, an option from there. But it just works really nicely. So that's how to add sort of the seamless quality sort of to, or how they've added the seamless quality to the base cabinetry here. You can go one step further as well and go for the mid rail, having the you know, the rail going all the way around and back to the wall if you want to. That obviously is only needed if you're going for a mid rail and you've got drawers. You can see on this design you don't necessarily need that. I'd say if you're sort of doing it up against a wall like this, you probably don't need that. But if you've got sort of an island and you're looking to get that, you know, really sort of seamless floating look going all the way around, I would personally incorporate, if you can, 2 of the C panels. So this is an L because naturally it's the shape of an L. C panel is where it goes at the front, around the side, and then back, you know, into itself. So it's creating a whole sort of C essentially, and covering all areas of the end of an island. But they're really popular, and having it with the mid rail just carries, it has a line at the top, you have a line in the middle going all the way around, so it just looks completely floating, no interruptions. And then also with your plinth, so it just looks like a complete floating sort of, you know, island, which again just works so well for this style of kitchen. So those are the sort of the panel suggestions that I would sort of suggest for you, if you can. So basically, to put all of that into a nutshell, is if you've got any exposed ends, just reconsider, you know, how, you know, what's fitted onto the end of it. So if you can have them raised and have like an L shape like this, if it's the end of sort of a sink run against a wall, or with your island, like how is that going to look all the way round? If you don't, if you're sort of looking at the C panels and the L panels, or maybe from a price perspective, you're just like, look, love the look of it, but equally, you know, there's a cost element to that. There are different ways to achieve, you know, or to finish the ends of your sort of island, for instance. You could go for waterfall ends, say if you've got, you know, a slab of material on one side, you know, free from maybe if you've got sort of a small section and it's eaten into a slab of material for your worktop. So you could look to have a mitre jointed sort of waterfall end, maybe on one side or 2 sides, but naturally that's not going to help you from a cost perspective, because that will be pretty much, you know, a whole new slab if you're doing it on both sides. If you've got sort of a 900mm to sort of a 1200mm deep island, it's going to go, you know, all the way across, so therefore there's going to be cost implications for that. But it's just re-looking at how sort of the end of the runs are finished. Wall cabinets, I'd say, are not as prevalent with this. I think it's still the norm to have a standard end panel either side of sort of the wall cabinets. You can, in some ranges, have that so that's recessed into the cabinet as well. But again, it just depends on personal preference. Personally, I like an end panel still on a wall cabinet, or no wall cabinets at all, and then incorporate open shelving, dependent on, again, personal preference. Something to note is with your wall cabinets, which this display shows so well if you are watching, is there's no interruptions with a cornice or palmet. So what I normally find is with the handleless kitchens that we're talking about, it's the norm, I would say, not to go for a cornice at the top. Naturally, it's not going to be a really sort of traditional looking cornice, but you can still go for ones that are like 28mm, or even, lay your plinth at the bottom, on its side, so that you've got an 18mm thickness going across the top, and then maybe under the sort of the bottom. But equally, I think because you're looking for that pared back, minimal sort of look, it's better to keep off the cornice and the palmet on this particular design. And then not having the palmet will allow you to oversize the door that we've mentioned before, which again works well. Bifold doors are also a really great storage option. They are more in cost than your hinge door, so that's something to think about. But bifold door pretty much is sort of where it's positioned on this design, is it's imitating the drawer pack underneath. So again, sort of from a symmetrical perspective, works and works really well, and would work really well actually for all three of these cabinets going across. But again, financially it is more. But basically, they're a lift-up system. So we've got the Aventos Blum lift-up system that we were speaking about earlier here. And yeah, it just means that you can keep that lifted up, you can work away, and you've got that, up in the air, pull it back down. Doors oversized, so naturally you've got that mechanism to open, and then, pop it away, then it's all sorted. But it just adds again to that, modern element, and it's all about the function and the accessibility. It's obviously less fussy than if you're going for a more traditional timeless kitchen. There's less detailing on the door, that sort of thing, which is why the sort of the extra details for the the add-ons like your end panels, plinths and things is a nice added extra, because again, it makes you change the design to suit your preference. But also just considering sort of the function, like lift up systems like that is really popular. Like rather than having a bank of wall cabinets like this, having one large bifold in the middle would suit and work really well. And again, it doesn't need to be a certain height. You can change different heights and levels with things. You could have maybe sort of a tall cabinet here, maybe one the other side. You can bring maybe the middle cabinets, if you're having something in the middle, down slightly, add an open shelf like we did on the first design that I was speaking about, where it's like a modular sort of grid system. Or you could add a bulkhead going across, add beautiful sort of lighting strips and things in it. You can also play around with the different sort of heights and levels of the furniture as well. You could have one section which is raised up higher, different sort of cabinets, maybe lift up systems, or shorter cabinets another side. Have the ability to use that as like a little shelf above that if you wanted to, different heights and levels. It might be a case of you go really tall for your larger cabinets, or you add top boxes across. So you can add top boxes going all the way across. Say if you've got 2 larders one side and 2 larders another, you can add sort of top boxes full depth going all the way across, and then you can put a second set of top boxes sort of in the middle, which are shorter height cabinets that lift up, just to at sort of the normal wall cabinet depth at 300mm or 320. So again, you're just adding different, you're sort of adding more to that modular sort of aesthetic. Something else to think about from a design perspective for, a handleless kitchen is also the lighting. So it's so important to make sure that you've got, your lighting on point. I'd say make sure it's all the same hue, make sure it's positioned correctly. So naturally, if you're going for a handleless rail like this, a lot of clients love the look of having a routed out section on the underside of their worktop, and then having a recessed lighting strip fixed going around there. That works really well. There are more cost-effective options of that now from lighting companies where they actually just clipped sort of like the back of the rail. So therefore you're not having to pay for a routed out cost of the worktop, which they do over sort of a milling charge over sort of like a square meterage. So it can add, you know, quite a bit to the cost. But equally you could just look to do that on your island if you wanted to. Also, plinth lights are really popular as well. Not so much the spotlights. I'd say they're quite a traditional way of incorporating lights now, but equally having the strip lights at the bottom and having those, you don't need to necessarily have those recessed into the cabinet, sort of, you know, the underside of the cabinet. You can just have those surface mounted running across and around sort of the base cabinets there. Of course, under wall cabinet lights are really important as well. We've got spots on this particular display where I'm at. You can go for a long strip, sort of recessed strip on the underside if you wanted to, or you might be going for some, you know, maybe one cabinet and then maybe a shelf, and then you can incorporate some sort of wall lights coming off from that as well, just to add, again, a bit more personality to the space and something a little bit different if you don't need to just clutter the wall with lots of cabinets. You know, looking at more accessible and usable storage in each cabinet as opposed to just putting, you know, cabinets everywhere. Something like that would be really popular. Just breaks that whole run up a little bit. And also, of course, if you've got sort of lighting going over an island, looking at sort of your pendant lights, you can get some beautiful bespoke sort of extractor fans made that incorporate lighting features onto it now. You know, there's so many different options that you can go for, which probably doesn't help you from a decisions perspective. Just adding different, you know, you're sort of adding more to that modular sort of aesthetic with a modern kitchen design. So there's so many different options to look at and think about, but I'm hoping sort of what we've covered today about the, you know, the different design sort of tips and things to think about, I hope that it's been helpful for you. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you have liked what we have spoken about, why not like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Also, what you can do is click on the notification bell to keep yourself notified of all the new content to come.